I will never be defeated by PTSD. I am resilient now. I do something that sounds so simple, and something I didn't do before my suicide attempt in 2002. I asked for help. I realize how asking for help does not make me less of anything. On the contrary, it makes me a better soldier, a better husband, a better father, a better person.
America has the greatest military in the world, and it's all because of our brave men and women that serve. But when they're discharged, the battle doesn't end for them there. For most of it, the fight starts. The toughest battles are not against the enemy, but against themselves. Today, we have an incredible show. We're going to be talking about our veterans and how they need help and how we can help them. Today, our sponsors are Clarity Health Solutions and Business Services for You. So I want to get right to this because we got a lot to talk about. Again, today we have our co-host. It's Jennifer Hoskins-Tomko from
Alan.
Clarity Health Solutions.
So grateful.
Okay. And we have some special guests in here. We have two people from an organization, a nonprofit called the 22 Project. We have John Goldman, who is a board member and retired United States Marine Corps.
That's correct.
Okay, and thank you so much for your service.
We got
really
a lot more
appreciate
out
it.
of it than I put into it, Alan, to tell you the truth.
Well, thank you. And we also have the co-founder of the 22 Project, which is Alex Cruz.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show today.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in. This is a really important topic. And they work with veterans with PTSD mainly, right?
Correct. Traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and mental health issues.
Okay. So how do you go about doing it? Because you do it in a way that's different than I've ever heard before. If you could just give us a little background on yourself, and also how do you work with them? How do you work with veterans?
Sure. So in 2009, I was introduced to a therapy through some of the brain imaging work that we do today. I run a medical diagnostic radiology center here in Delray Beach since 1996. In 2009, I had a retired colonel that showed up at my doorstep who was working with the Red Cross, and he had a grant to treat 10 Gulf War veterans with this therapy called hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I didn't know what it was, but I said, yeah, I had a nuclear camera, so brain SPECT imaging is nuclear medicine imaging.
Okay.
It's a little bit different than MRI and CAT scan, but they needed a way to show how the brain looks before they have these treatments and how does it respond to these oxygen treatments after. So it's not mainstream radiology, so I had to contact my colleagues at Jackson, find out what's involved. There's a particular isotope that we use that becomes the X-ray agent, if you will. But what it does is it highlights areas of the brain, the entire brain region, that gives us an idea what areas of the brain are under functioning, what areas of the brain are their function is way too high, out of control. And then we can see how some therapies can work better in that section of the brain. So we started out with the 10, and I saw how each veteran that were doing the treatments, when they came back 4 weeks later to do their second scan, it was incredible. We went from a 30-year-old man, their brain looked like Swiss cheese, if I can put it in that terminology so your audience can understand, and 3-4 weeks later, they come back, have the second scan, and it looks like a normal brain. The function is there. The areas that should be working are put back together. All these pockets are gone. And I was like, what is this stuff?
I got to ask you about that, too, because I see here on your website, it says, healing the invisible wounds of war. And when we talk about depression and suicide, I always compare it to, you can't look at the brain and see what's going on with it. It's not like your broken arm. You can take an X-ray and you can see the broken arm and you know how to fix it. And we say that you can't look at the brain like that, but you're saying we can.
We can, and we have. Most notably, we have Dr. Daniel Amen out of California, who's been doing this, practicing psychiatry, looking and diagnosing off brain imaging brain and then forming a more common sense treatment approach. It's not always with medications. Sometimes you do have to use them, but that should be the last resort.
Yeah.
So they look at the brain and they properly diagnose it.
So it's not only, obviously people that are in battle, they have a lot of, maybe concussions, I guess you would call it, from
Right.
bombs going off. So obviously that does damage to the brain, but that's not always what causes PTSD.
Correct.
It could just be visualizing something that really stuck with you. But the brain reacts to that too, and you could see what's going on with the brain?
Yes. We're looking at the amygdala. We're looking at the midbrain structures that controls anxiety and controls depression. All these are and Jennifer here could probably tell you, these are chemical balances that are very delicate. And if something's out of whack, let's say a concussion that maybe, in putting military aside, someone had a car accident or had a concussion when they were playing sports, and things just started to degrade a little bit after that, and they've never put the two and two together. Sometimes it's what we call in radiology comorbidities. It's diagnosing all the other symptoms that might be associated with the one that we're focusing on, which it might be depression or it might be anxiety, but there might be other underlying things.
So, and again, one of the things, Alex, I find so fascinating is the way you treat them. It seems like it's so simple, but it's really not. When you have somebody that has PTSD and you find something in the brain, how do you go about helping them? I mean, obviously you said medication's the last resort.
Right.
How do you diagnose it, and how do you help them?
Well, hyperbaric oxygen therapy has been around for a long time. This is not new treatments. It's FDA regulated to treat diabetic patients that have wounds on their legs and extremities that do not heal. They might have certain injuries that don't heal right, infections. They use it for other things, a myriad of different things, amputee patients, burn victims. So this is forcing oxygen and blood to areas that it can't normally get to when you put them in a pressurized environment. So if it works for extremities, doesn't it make sense that it would also work in the brain?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we need to live. Obviously, the more oxygen, well, obviously they said the better flow you have with the blood, it brings the oxygen throughout the blood, throughout the whole body, and that's what actually heals you.
That's the healing agent. Exactly. So
I want to share a couple of tidbits about, PTSD, like how that even comes about and things like that, because I just want to educate the community as well.
Sure.
So there are a couple of factors that indicate whether or not somebody is going to have PTSD or not. One of them is the perception of what's happening in the moment of that trauma. So, for instance, if you have two people who were in a car accident, one might walk out and they're absolutely fine, and the other one can never really drive again, or they might struggle with making left turns or what have you. And the difference is a real or perceived sense of helplessness and hopelessness in that moment. So it's about control. So what ends up happening in the brain is the anxiety that comes from that moment where that adrenaline rush ends up being there all the time for that person who has the PTSD. So one of the things that can really help people eliminate the chronicity of PTSD is getting treatment very early after the trauma. So I've already got in touch with Bahamas. Like, when can I get there? Because the sooner the better, for that very reason. So I like what you had said, Alex, about the idea about the hardware. I know that was prior to us getting on, but I think that was really relevant. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's been my experience when we're watching these young men and women come back from 5-8 years of war, and you do the scan, you start to talk to them, seeing what they're exposed to. So they're being exposed to heavy ordinances that are being discharged that their bodies were not meant to handle. They're having concussions out in the field. These are 18, 20-year-old boys shaking it off, getting back up and running again. So when they come to my office, I first try to explain to them the difference between traumatic brain injury and PTS. And the difference is, I always say, I said, if I took my computer and I dropped it on the ground, you'd have some broken components. You'd have some areas of that computer that would actually need to be repaired before we can program it again. So for me, me, my concept of traumatic brain injury is like hardware damage. And there's therapies like hyperbaric oxygen that do very well to repair that. And then you have software corruption, which is the PTS. And that could be images that are being burned in their short-term memory from experiences that they have. It can be a heightened sense of alert all the time that takes away their normal cadence of sleep and getting rest for the brain to heal and recover. So when they come back, they have insomnia. It's one of the most common epidemics that I don't hear people talking about is among our militaries. 98% of all the veterans I see, they don't sleep more than 2 to 3 hours a night, every night of their life.
And you know, John, I just want to ask you, obviously, first of all, how did you get involved with the 22 Project?
Well, we had a golf outing about 5 years ago for veterans causes, and one of the people that was playing was Alex. And during the time after the golf tournament was over, to raise more money, I ended up getting a mohawk from a barber, and they painted pink, and we raised another $8,000.
It got my attention.
I hope there's photos out there somewhere.
And we told a story about a veteran that I met, a Marine, downtown Fort Lauderdale, was homeless, and after 3 consecutive Saturdays of meeting with him, trying to get him off the street, trying to get him with the colonel, he disappeared, and I had given him my business card, and I got a call from police, and they said that if I asked if I knew him, and I did, and he had committed suicide. Oh. And I realized then that the preponderance of suicide deaths among veterans was much higher than I ever thought.
Yeah.
And the following year, Alex came down, and we included Alex as one of the beneficiaries of the golf tournament, and he explained to me some of the things that he was doing. And over the next few months, we started talking about maybe getting involved because he didn't have many veterans that were on the board. And I think my first board meeting, they said they were bringing in a veteran that had suffered TBI, had been at Fort Hood 10 years ago and was shot. One of the 13 that was, he survived it, but he had removed 20% of his brain. He was coming in for the treatment, and we needed to raise some money. At that time, it was sort of pass the hat around for every veteran that was coming in. So I went out and did a 22-mile walk on a GoFundMe page. Oh, wow. And I enjoyed it immensely, and we got very close, Patrick and I, and he's doing pretty well. He's actually going to be featured by the Florida Panthers in November at a game as a veteran.
Great.
And the Panthers are giving us out of their foundation $25,000 every year, last year and this year. So it started the ball rolling, and I like Alex and Erica and the other board members, and we started talking about, you know, how we affect veterans, how it impacts today's veteran, with the incidence of suicide being 50% higher in that 18 to 35 bracket than the normal general population. So all those things contributed to my interest, and now I'm sort of the resident historian, having been served during the Vietnam War, and seeing my dad who served both in World War II and Korea, how we have, you know, whether it was called shell shock in World War I or battle fatigue in World War II, or, you know, I was a master of the 1,000-yard stare after Vietnam. We all had mental issues that we had to deal with.
But it wasn't diagnosed.
It was not diagnosed. And today, with post-traumatic stress and TBI, I think there's hope for a lot of them.
Yeah, and you know what? I was telling you before, statistics are incredible. I was looking on here, and I mentioned it before, in Afghanistan in 2018, it was about 2,000, a little over 2,000 people that passed in the battle over there in Afghanistan, and that's our brave military. But when they come home, we're talking 22 people a day take their lives in the military. That's over 8,000. So you've got 4 times the amount of people that are taking their lives after they serve. And one of the things that you don't really see it, you know, you don't know what PTSD is. You're walking around, you see people. I was in Costco's the other day at the pharmacy, and I saw a gentleman there, and he just looked bewildered and lost. And, you know, they were asking questions. He was I guess spacing out was the best term. And it turns out that we didn't know. He turned to the person next to him and said he has PTSD, and he was in the military. But again, a lot of times when you see people like that, you look at them, you don't realize what they're going through. And it was a really tough to see how he was reacting and responding. And PTSD reacts in all different ways. It's not just a constant thing. Some people are fine all day, and then I was telling you about my next door neighbor who was in the Marines and, will wake up in the middle of the night screaming. Tell us a little bit more. First of all, and I think it's phenomenal what you're doing. Tell me a little bit more about how the operation works. How do people get in touch with you? How, if someone has a loved one that's a veteran, I really think that this is something that could really help.
I would say, the first thing is have the courage to reach out. We're very easy to find. It's you can find us on the web through support22project.org. Our office is here in Delray, but we're flying veterans from all over the country.
Oh, wow.
Putting them here for a month. We have, being a business owner, there are so many wonderful business people that love our military and do so much. So one of my neighbors owns a hotel right here in Boca. He gives me the rooms for $50 a night. We're flying veterans. There's an airline organization that flies the veterans here for free.
Oh,
we get them a rental car. All they have to do is worry about food. They don't have to worry about anything. But
so they don't pay for the treatment?
Nothing. They don't pay for any of the treatments. They don't pay for any of the appointments with our physicians, with any of the medical stuff. They don't pay. And as a matter of fact, because we have such a big group of veterans that have gone through the program, even John, we have fellowship meetings every other week at Nova Southeastern University, who is a big fan of our military, has given us a wonderful room called the Veterans Resource Center, where we meet there every other Saturday morning. We provide coffee and bagels, and it's a time for them to feel that camaraderie again that they miss. Because remember, these are service men and women. They gave their life to service. That's what they love to do. Yep. They leave the military. They don't have that anymore. So putting them in an atmosphere where they're talking to other Marines and Army colonels and
something that's incredible. Really interesting, and I think that's really important because I was talking with the chief of Putnam County, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and even with other people that I've spoken with that have family, fiancés, husbands in one person in particular in Germany who's a master sergeant retiring next year, and he doesn't know what he's scared. He doesn't know what he's going to do when he comes out. It's like his control, everything he knew is gone starting next year. So, when you hear about that, the one thing that the chief said to me is that, like with police officers, when they come out, they think they lose their family and they can't go back in because they're not one of them anymore. But with you, they're going and there's a lot of people there that they are camaraderie.
Yes. And it's pretty cool, actually, because we have Navy SEALs that come here from California to get treatments. So they'll be in as our guest during our fellowship meetings. And it's just the dynamic that happens when you put these men and women around each other again. They start to share stories and bring things to light that they were probably burying inside for themselves.
So first of all, and I know, John, I had spoken to you, and when I guess we were talking, you had 30 people, and I guess it was a trial or something you were doing, and you said there was like basically 100% success rate with this. Yeah,
I mean, I defer to Alex on that, but the numbers have grown tremendously. I think as the word gets out, the funding's improving. One of the things I think that's interesting, having served a long time ago, when you got out from the service, from active service, and you were having problems, you had that warrior mentality that you sucked it up.
Yeah, you could take care of it yourself.
And I went to see my dad, and he suck it up. I made 6 landings in World War II. You can go back to work. So we never thought about those kinds of things. But some of these folks were really suffering. And when I served, and you went to a forward unit, you were plug and play. 2 or 3 guys went into a unit, and then you didn't really get to know anybody because they didn't know your name. They just knew that you had 380 days and a wake up until you were off, out of country. And Today, it's different because these guys train together, they get deployed together, they come home together, then they get redeployed together, and sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 times. And then all of a sudden they come back to North Carolina and they say, oh, thanks for your service, you got 3 days and goodbye. Okay. And that loss of kinship is as traumatic as some of the things that you've gone through.
Yeah.
And you can see it. So I think that the post-traumatic stress is different today than it ever was. We still have the severe injuries and the concussions and things like that, but the loss of fellowship that you experience. I was in the military. I went in almost 49 years ago when I got off the Paris Island. I enjoy going to these fellowship meetings and meeting the young guys, and some of them are my age, and it's like the years, it's invisible. You know, you were in the Navy, I was in the Marine Corps, he was in the Army, and there's
still a bond that goes on.
And we kid each other. You know, somebody will say, well, you know, the Marine Corps is a department of the Navy. I see you have the men's department. We all laugh about that kind of things. But that camaraderie is really important, and I think that's a great follow-up to the treatment that Alex has.
We only have a few minutes left, but what I really want to do is, can you walk us through real quick? Someone calls you and says, my husband needs help, or a loved one needs help, or I need help. Right. Take us through the steps of how they do it.
So we send them an application that they fill out. It's a grant application. It's a few pages. They provide for us their DD-214, which basically tells us they were service related, and then we basically, as long as they meet the criteria, as long as they can commit to having the time, because it does take time to do the therapy, they're doing 2 treatments a day, then we can accept them into.
Now, when you say treatments, you're talking about the hyperbaric chambers?
Hyperbaric oxygen treatment.
Okay.
So to answer your question, once they're approved, they'll speak to one of our physicians. They'll do basically a consult, an intake, if you will. Then we schedule them for the first scan, which identifies where they're at for the traumatic brain.
So you do the scan before you do the hyperbaric chambers?
Do the scan before the hyperbaric
chambers. Okay, so it's before and after.
Exactly. Then we immediately get them started to one of our local participating hyperbaric therapy centers, and they'll go usually twice a day. In the morning, they put them in glass tube, 40 inches wide, so it's pretty big. Put them on a gurney. They put them in there. They pressurize the chamber at typically anywhere from 1.5 atmospheric pressure to 2 atmospheric pressures. These are medical grade hyperbaric chambers. They're there for an hour, and all they do is they just breathe and sleep and whatever they can for that hour, and then they have to come back 4 hours later, because there has to be a 4-hour window between the 2 sessions.
I got to ask one question. When you have the 1 hour, how much time on a normal person sleeping does that correlate to? Is there a number? Like if 1 hour equals 6 hours of sleep, or?
Well, you're not really going to sleep. All you're doing is you're just breathing medical grade oxygen is what you're doing. So what happens to the body when you're in a pressurized environment, to make it very short, is the plasma of the blood gets saturated with oxygen and gets it to all the capillaries and all the areas that typically cannot get to because of injury or inflammation.
Got it.
This is what promotes the healing process. And one thing that I have to go back to is, in about a week to 10 days, these young men and women that haven't been sleeping for more than 2 hours a day, within a week to 10 days, they're sleeping 6 to 8 hours a night.
Oh, that's incredible.
They start to develop a pattern of sleep again. They're done with the 40 treatments. They go back, they have their second scan, and then we're able to go over those results.
And with this, do you also have therapy that goes with them, or?
I always say it's better. They're dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of issues. You can't overload them with too many things.
Yeah.
You got to take it one step at a time.
Well,
better for them.
It's absolutely incredible. 2 things. Obviously, you're doing this. You're not charging for it. How do people help you out with funding? Give us a real quick number and contact for people to get in touch with you.
Perfect. Funding is all through donations. We are a 501c3, so it is tax deductible. We partner with the Florida Panthers. They've been one of our corporate sponsors. Monet Global has really stepped up to the plate and seen the value in this. And we have other corporate sponsors. My own company is a sponsor. That's how we started. So it's all through private donations, and people who want to donate, they can go to our website, which is support22project.org, and they can contact us. Our phone number is 888-915-5652.
I really appreciate it. Again, we have John Goldman from the 22 Project, and Alex. John is a board member and retired United States Marine Corps, and we have Alex, who's the CEO and the co-founder of the 22 Project. It's an incredible organization. Obviously, the military really protects us and helps us live the life that we have now. We need to support them and help them out. So please, reach out if you could, help them with funding or anything else. You can give them a call. Jennifer Hoskin-Tomko, we appreciate you being in here today and help us with your expertise. Remember, this is September is Suicide Prevention Month. So please get out there. We have the walks going on September 28th at John Prince Park. We have the Out of the Darkness walk there, a sponsor. Go on our website page. You can go to www.afsp.org/Palm Beach, or you can just go to afsp.org and find the walks throughout the country. Have a great day. We're good?
All good.
Oh, God, that hurt.
So loud.
So, I don't know if you guys want to keep going, we could keep going on this, because we're on the Facebook. You didn't turn that off, did you? Okay, so we're on the Facebook Live. So we're still here if anybody wants to.
I have a couple of questions. You would still do this?
Yeah, because that's going through.
Sorry. So first, I know that some of the treatments like neurofeedback and TMS are much better if you're doing CBT or some kind of therapy during the actual treatment itself. I'm wondering if it's the same situation, that you would have even better efficacy if you had like a therapist kind of helping them through something.
We haven't done it that way. I can tell you that it is even though it doesn't seem like a lot when they're doing the therapy, it sounds like an hour and an hour, it takes up their whole day. And typically, you'll see for those veterans that haven't slept in a long time, they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They're exhausted. So the therapy, a lot of these guys they start to do on their own, they have to eat better. They can't smoke, so they have to give up smoking before starting with hyperbaric oxygen. So they want to start working out. So they start caring about their physicality, which is something that they've let go for so long. Some of these guys are so overweight, and they were in their best shape of their life when they were in the military, right? So the things that weren't as important now start to become important. And then after a month, they're excited to hear about other therapies.
One of the things I was just thinking about, and when you have a broken bone, what do? You get an x-ray, you put it in a cast, you let it heal, and then you do rehab. And it's basically the same thing. You're taking an x-ray a pretty sophisticated x-ray of the brain, and then you're putting them into basically a cast, which is the hyperbaric chamber to heal it, let it heal. And then after that, they're probably going to need therapy.
Perfect analogy.
It's really the same thing. And I'm so
excited to see what it'd be like in conjunction. I'd be really curious.
Well, we're in the process of working with NOAA Southeastern University doing research studies.
Good.
Oh, that's incredible.
Fantastic.
So we might be contacting you.
So how has the military reacted to this? Have they helped? Have they gotten involved? Have you reached out to them?
Not to the VA, not through the government, because there's so much red tape, and and John can tell you, if you're not military, you're not even going to get past.
Well, I got to tell you one thing, because when I was in D.C., and I forget his name, but the Secretary of Veterans Affairs was there.
Wilkie.
Yeah, and he seemed like a great guy. First of all, he was really concerned. Obviously, he said some things about the VA hospital and how it has to be improvements, and he was pretty adamant and straightforward on talking. There was no BS with him. I think he would be amazed at what you're doing, and I would love to see if there's a way that we could reach out to him and just try to find a way. I mean, I could try and contact the AFSP and see if they have a contact with him, but
That would be great.
I don't know if they do or not, but he spoke at our event up there, and he was just amazing. And he really seems like he's concerned, and he wants to help, and obviously he's been through it, so, he sees what's going on in this country with the veterans. I mean, I think if you could get in touch with him, that would be incredible.
I have enough data to be able to sit down with anybody and show them that it works. And this is just objective measures. Just looking at the scan and the journal entries and seeing just everything that improves.
And there was another gentleman I met when I went down to the Coral Springs, the town hall meeting for the MSD. There was a gentleman there from an organization up in Orlando where it's diversion, or what is it called? Diversion, not diversion, where they put the people back in the environment that they were in that caused the PTSD. Yeah. And he was saying that it was unbelievable how it helped with their PTSD. But I told him about your organization. He's like, yeah, he wants to do that because even though it kind of helped him with the PTSD, there's still like a white cloud, he explained. I'm not sure what that meant.
Fogginess.
And he said that's what the hyperbaric chamber could help with too.
And I get that all the time. That's the way they explain it, is like they say like the fogginess is lifted. They think clearly, they can function better, they can retain much more. So when you have young guys that they're telling you now they're excited about going back to college because their retention level is so much better. And I have some of these guys, they're being reintroduced back into different careers, service-related careers. They're going back into the fire service, and they're excited about serving again. So that's some of the things. And these were people that they were just getting through life before, let alone thinking about starting a new career.
And the brain scan shows that they're pretty much, it's all normal afterwards and everything is good. And
the most common question I get is, do you keep, does it go back the other way, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell people, you keep what you gain. These are new neural pathways that are developed. These are neurons that weren't firing before because of injury or because of inflammation. So the hyperbaric oxygen turns that off, causes these connections again, and so you don't lose it unless you're doing bad stuff to your body.
So let me ask you in this realm, because they say, I don't know if it's joking, I'm not a doctor or anything, but there are cells in the brain that die off. Is this basically recreating new cells, or is this?
No, once it's dead, that's an infarct. You can't get those cells to come back. What in areas even of an infarct, where there's an area that dies off, around that area of the infarct, what we call the penumbra, there are cells, because they're so close to impact, that are in a dormant, stunned state because of inflammation.
Okay.
So what the hyperbaric oxygen does is it reintroduces oxygen to those areas, the penumbra. So those are the areas that revitalize.
Okay.
So even stroke patients and patients that have had different brain injuries would improve.
Really?
Years later, yes.
Because I know this. I'm sorry, John.
No. One of the things I was going to talk about, going back to the VA, and I had some experience with them, is it's such an overwhelmingly large organization,
right,
that a lot of these things are minute issues. You talk about a couple of hundred veterans that get successfully treated, that hopefully will be a couple thousand in a few years. But traditionally, the way they've treated is with giving you a lot of drugs. And one of the things that we've seen is a lot of these men and women have to wean themselves off of the drug dependency, and that's always, so they've taken down sort of the wrong path. The other thing that I see, which is it bothers me in many ways, is we've created a system of welfare from a lot of veterans. When they come out, I remember going to a fellowship meeting and listening to, how do we get more out of the VA? And it becomes a dollars and cents. Well, I'm 70%, I'm 80%. We met a young man from West Palm who had both his lower legs blown off. And what did he do after he got his 8 months at Walter Reed? He went to Duke for his graduate program. He now works for Goldman Sachs, and it's all behind him. He doesn't take any, you get some pension, but it's not like a grab all. And I think one of the things that we've set up is this welfare dependency from a lot of veterans.
Yep.
And you get a guy or a lady that's 35, 40, 42 years old that was an officer in the service, is well trained, that all of a sudden can't go out and find a job. So this is the first step, I think, where they get a feeling of, I can be okay. The second step is getting them back into a society where they can contribute. And I think that's really important.
Well, again, as a purpose in anything, as far as any kind of mental health issue, the first thing you got to do is create a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. We've had a couple of guys that were, completely dependent upon their disability, and now they're gainfully employed and contributing. In one case is actually involved in a veterans organization, and I've seen the improvement right before my eyes in the last 18 months. The guy is incredible.
Yeah.
You know what? While you were treating, remember when Leslie came down, the Marine? When she was down here for the month, she went out fishing every day. Every night she would go fishing. And when her husband came down the last weekend she was here, he couldn't believe she had lost 12 pounds and looked 10 years younger. Because she felt good about herself. She wasn't getting off the couch at home, and now she's out there working out, going fishing every night. Now she runs a veterans fishing outdoor. What's it called?
It's a recreational therapy.
It's unbelievable.
And raising a 1-year-old too.
And raising a 1-year-old.
There are a lot of barriers when it comes to PTSD also, because again, even trying to get life insurance, you have PTSD, you can't get life insurance. Yeah. You fought for our country, you put your life in jeopardy, and now you come out, and if you're diagnosed with it, you can't get it. And I think that's an injustice. But again, hopefully with your technology, it creates it so it reverses it, and if the brain's normal, there's no reason why they can't get these other benefits out there that everybody else could get.
Absolutely. I would say it's a journey.
Yeah.
Right. So these therapies it's not a cure-all. It's a journey they're on to educate them, to know how they can function better, how they can contribute better, put their families. Think of the ripple effect. Once you have one soldier's life put back together, the ripple effect it has on on his or her family.
Yeah, it's not just himself, it's the family too.
I work with the 9/11 first responders. I have several firefighters, and then I also work with current first responders. And, that would be a great, even though it's not the same as, it's similar. It's very similar because you see things and experience things that you wouldn't normally, the general population. But, I think that this is great. You had mentioned that it's off-label. So if somebody wanted to, that wasn't a veteran, and it would be applicable for them too, like what would they expect to process they have to go through to get?
I mean, at the very least, having the brain spec scan would be a way to identify, well, why don't I feel? I mean, you have firemen that are being exposed to toxic substances that affect their brain. They go into a fire, there's a chemical fire, they've inhaled this stuff, and it affects their brain, and they don't know why they feel or, why they don't function the way they used to. So identifying that is first, and then you can help them, point them to therapies that can be based on, your symptoms and based on the scan. This is a therapy that does very good for you, an EMDR or something like that. And that way you're not just throwing, darts on a board and trying to hope what is going to work. You're actually putting together a good diagnostic picture before you treat it.
Yeah.
So you got better outcomes.
Yeah, I think this was incredible. Love to have you on again, and
thank you.
I really think that we need to promote this more, and hopefully Jen, with her profession, could really help out too. Because again, I think you guys work together.
Sure.
It's a perfect fit. So again, you fix it with the cast, and then you rehab it afterwards.
Yep.
So, well, I appreciate your time,
thanks,
guys.
Alan. We appreciate everything you do.
Jupiter.
Okay.
Oh, good.
You can end it now.
All right, thanks.